Hi, this is Stuart Nachbar with Educated Quest. Today I have a special guest, Thomas Day. He is the manager of international recruitment North America for Newcastle University in the UK. I have to admit, I knew nothing about this school until Thomas and I were introduced by a mutual professional colleague. But as I listened to the materials Thomas supplied to me, and I watched YouTubes that were produced by others, I wanted all of you out there to know more about Newcastle. It's a very, very interesting city university that is somewhat reminiscent to me, at least, of like the University of Michigan, the University of California, Berkeley, the University of Pittsburgh, the University of Pennsylvania, in its academic makeup, in its urban makeup, and the idea that you could go right into a city, right out the campus gate. So, Thomas, thank you for agreeing to be with me today.
Thank you for having me, Stuart.
What should American uh, prospective students know about Newcastle, know about the university, besides the beautiful campus behind you?
Yes, so I'll start off with some facts and figures. So we were established in 1834 as a medical school, and we've grown now into an institution that has three faculties. So we have medical sciences still, and we also have humanities, arts, and social sciences, and then also a faculty of science, agriculture, and engineering. We've got roughly 28,000 students across our undergraduate and graduate communities, with students from about 120 different nationalities, so very international. We are ranked in the world top 110 best universities, so very proud of our international rankings, particularly. And we are an urban campus, would be the best way to describe us. We're very much, as you said from the picture behind me, a lovely historic university campus where you can wander around and go and study in nice old buildings. But at the same time, we're also literally a stone's throw, 2 minutes walk from where I'm sat right now, and you're in the heart of our city centre. Newcastle is a very well-known student-friendly city. I think last time it was sort of ranked normally somewhere between the top, if not in the top five best student cities in the UK. Very popular with students, very safe, very friendly, very welcoming to students, but certainly not a college town at the same time. It's got a lot going on beyond what happens on campus. And Newcastle is also a member of something called the Russell Group in the UK, which, to kind of describe it in one catchphrase, would be the UK's version of the Ivy League, essentially. It's a group of 24 or so universities that at the heart are very research intensive, well ranked, well regarded. It does include Oxford and Cambridge, amongst others. And essentially that puts us in a group of elite institutions, but not necessarily super, super selective. So I wouldn't want to put students off, but it does mean we do have higher academic requirements maybe than some other universities in the UK that are not members of the Russell Group.
And for you touch on something with academic requirements.
Hmm.
What do American applicants need to know on the academic side before they apply? For example, like thoughts about what they want to study. Do
Yep.
they need to submit test scores? Do they need to write essays? Do they need to do the things they would do if they were applying to an American college?
Hmm. So the application process in the UK is very centralized, and very pretty much standardized across all universities. So there is a system called UCAS or UCAS, and everyone applies through that system. And so that helps students kind of understand the one system for every university, which is quite useful. And in terms of the academic requirements, they do then differ by university and also by program as well, because in the UK, when you're applying to a university, you're not applying to that university on a broader sense. You're applying to a specific program at that university. So that could be history and archaeology at Newcastle, or it could be biomedical sciences at Newcastle. So you need to look carefully at the actual program that you want to study and the requirements for that program. We've got a relatively flexible policy at Newcastle in terms of the academic requirements. So we're not test blind, but we are test flexible. So students can apply with APs, they can apply with the SAT or the ACT, they could apply with honors classes or dual enrollment classes. If they've taken the IB diploma, they could apply with that. It's all outlined on our website essentially as to what we can or can't accept. The one sort of big difference really between the UK and the US is that if a student had just done a standard high school diploma and hadn't done any advanced classes, that wouldn't be something we could accept. And the reason is because generally speaking, our degrees are only 3 years in length. You're not doing a year of general education. So there's actually a gap of 1 year of education between what you would normally do at high school in the US and what you would have done had you gone to high school in the UK. And so when we set our admissions requirements, we set them based on students having done 13 years of schooling rather than 12 years. And so you need to make that gap up by taking some kind of advanced classes whilst you're at high school in the US. And so that's demonstrated through APs, through honors classes, through dual enrollment classes. So those are really important. But we're not wedded to students having to take the SAT or the ACT, for example. And students don't have to have 3 APs. They could have 1 AP and then 2 other things to supplement that AP that they've got. So it can be a little bit complicated to get your head around at first, but the admissions policy is very transparent, and essentially what is on our website is what we're looking for. We're not trying to look for additional things that we're not honest about. So there is an essay that you need to do as part of that UCAS application, but it's a personal statement that you write about the subject you want to study. So again, going back to what I was saying about history and archaeology, you write the personal statement about why do you want to study in history and archaeology. And actually, that one personal statement gets sent to every university that you apply to through UCAS. So they all read the same personal statement. So again, you make it all about the subject, not about the university more generally. And because if you were to write about why do you want to study history at Newcastle, but you also applied to, say, Manchester, Liverpool, King's College London, and Edinburgh, they would also read the same personal statement and would immediately say, well, why have you mentioned Newcastle in your personal statement if you were also applying to study with us? So that's quite different. Beyond that, some programs will have additional admissions tests. So things like medicine and dentistry do require them. Law at some universities, not at Newcastle though. And then we may also ask for things like portfolios. So for some of our more design-based subjects like art or music or architecture. And some programs will also have an interview, but those are more for the most competitive programs we offer. Generally speaking, most programs, you write your personal statement, you send us your academic grades, and we make a decision based on that.
So, like here, the way they do it is, let's say I took 3 APs as a junior in high school,
Mm-hmm.
and I'm going to take 3 more as a senior. Um, if I get a 5 on the 3 APs I took as a junior, some colleges give me credit for that, or they give me a pass into the course at the next level.
Mm-hmm.
Given that Newcastle, you're supposed to be done in 3 years, I guess you don't technically get a pass. The
You're getting
advanced
a
course
pass
is
by
the entry
choosing to
course.
come to you're basically getting a pass by coming and studying in the UK. And well, actually not the UK, because Scotland is a 4 year system, but you're getting a pass by choosing to study at a university in England, because we have a 3 year system. And that's why those APs are required as opposed to optional. And that's why we don't give you credit for them, because you have to have them or something equivalent to an AP in order to get onto the program in the first place. So well, yeah, some institutions in the US, if you've got enough APs, you'll be able to skip a whole year worth of study. Essentially, by coming and doing a system that's already set up for 3 years, you're skipping that year as anyway. But obviously, you need to prove that you're ready to do that. You're ready to make that jump between US high school and English undergraduate study, which is 1 year shorter. UK students aren't necessarily all geniuses. They're not making that skip because they've got sort of better education. They've just been at school for longer. That's essentially why the system, they don't have to necessarily prove to us that they can work at that level, because the system is already set up that they come in with equivalents to APs anyway.
If you hear from an American student who has a year of college,
Hmm.
because right now there's been a greater demand. One thing I've noticed in my world is there's been a greater demand to transfer.
Yeah.
And you get someone who is completing their first year of college, and they decide, well, they want to come to Newcastle. Are they, first of all, will you look at the application? And I guess the next thing is, are they treated as a first year student then? Because it's a 3-year
Um,
degree?
Yes and yes, essentially. So yes,
Okay.
we would look at them certainly. Um, and are they treated as a first year applicant? Yes, most likely, because it's in order for them to go into what would be year two of our degree, they would need to have done what would have done on year one of our degrees. And it's unlikely that in the US system you would have done enough credits in that one specific area. So to take say mechanical engineering, for example, it's unlikely that even if you were an engineering major at a US institution, you would have done enough engineering in year one to be able to go straight into year two of our engineering degree. Because probably even as an engineering major at a university in the US, you're still going to have been doing some general education, and so probably haven't taken enough engineering classes. So whilst we would consider you, it's unlikely you would get any kind of advanced entry, we call it. It's most likely that you would start in year one as a fresher or as a freshman student. But if for example you'd left high school without having APs or enough APs or whatever it might be to get into Newcastle, and then but did do a year at college in the US, obviously then we could consider that year of college in lieu of the APs or whatever it is you might not have had when you graduated high school. So that can be good for some students to know.
Do you find that students, like when you talk to your peers in admissions, that students from other countries are applying to more than one university in the UK?
Yes, it's quite common, and actually more than one country as well. We tend to find, I think, if you talk to students who go specifically to international schools, whether that's in the US or in other countries, it's quite common for them to say that they're applying to two or three different countries at the same time. And then within the UK, using that UCAS system, you are limited to applying to five majors. So generally speaking, that's one major at five different universities. That's the most common combination. So to speak from my own experience, I applied for modern languages. I actually ended up studying here at Newcastle, but I also applied to Leeds, Bath, Edinburgh, and Durham as well. So that's very normal to apply to more than one institution, and actually it's quite common to apply to more than one country as well. And most American students that I work with have are applying to US institutions as well as institutions in the UK. It's very, very rare that I speak to an American student who isn't applying to an American colleges as well. It does happen sometimes when they're really dead set on coming to the UK, but most likely it's that they've kind of got a couple of options in the US they're looking at, and then sort of five options in the UK as well.
Well, realizing that they would have to pay to fly to the UK, are there certain American institutions that stand out as being sort of cross-shopped, or is it just all over the place?
If you can repeat that one again, if you.
Are there certain, if it's an American applicant,
Mhm.
are there certain institutions in the US that you find more often than not are considered versus Newcastle?
So we partner quite closely with University of Pittsburgh. We have a similar civic sort of duty that they have. We're both post-industrial cities. The universities have been very in sort of important to the regeneration of those cities. But having never visited Pittsburgh myself, I can't say if they're an exact match. Um, eh, we we get a lot of students who come from sort of New England and the Mid-Atlantic, but we also get quite a lot of interest from students in Southern California and Texas. And most recently, I've noticed a lot of interest from students out of Florida as well. So um, I think we really appeal to a wide variety of students. And looking at the students that are here already on campus, both our UK and our international students, they come from a really mixed background. We don't find that we're known for a particular type of student. And I think generally speaking as well, students feel like they're really able to, without saying too cliched, find themselves whilst they're here. They're free to have a go at different clubs and societies. We're a good university for sport. We're in the top 10 for sport in the UK. So if students want to come and play sports, then we're a really good option. But at the same time, if they wanted to also do Latin ballroom dancing, then they could certainly do that as well. It's not that one thing needs to take up all of their free time, even if they are playing an elite level sport or they're in the orchestra or they're in they take part in the theatre group. They could also be in the baking group or in the Model UN or whatever it might be. So I tend to find students come from a variety of different backgrounds, and it can be hard to really say exactly what kind of institution or city we are like in the US because I guess that's the reason why you want to study abroad, right? They're two different countries with their own unique makeups, their own histories, their own cultures. Whilst we have a common language, and hopefully you understand most of what I'm saying, they they're still different to each other, and geography it really influences what UK cities are like in terms of how big they are, how far the urban spread is, how much walking you do versus driving, how far away you are from other places. So Newcastle is a city of about 300,000 people, but you probably would be mistaken for thinking it was much bigger when you walk down our main shopping street because it feels so much more busy than a US city with a similar number of people. Because US cities are much more kind of they spread out much further and there's a lot more open space, whereas UK cities are a lot busier and people live a lot closer together. The other funny thing as well about Newcastle particularly is that what's considered to be Newcastle is actually quite a relatively small area. I technically don't live in Newcastle. I only live about 15 minutes away though. But so on paper, I don't count as one of those 300,000 people, but I'm only about 15 minutes drive from Newcastle city centre or 20 minutes on the metro. And I technically live in another town. So actually, if you draw if you were to put a sort of a compass in the middle of the city and draw a circle that covered sort of a 30-minute commute, you're looking more at a million or so people. So it's actually much substantially much larger area than you would be if you Googled what is the population in Newcastle.
It's interesting because now you make me, one of the things you made me think about is like, I've been to Harvard. I wasn't a student there, but I've been
Hmm.
there. And Cambridge is kind of like that. You come out the gate and you're in, a very
Yeah,
active community.
yeah,
This
yeah,
is
yeah,
sort of
yeah.
like that.
Yeah, I would say so. I think the only difference I would say between Harvard and Cambridge, sorry, Harvard and Newcastle, sorry, Cambridge and Newcastle, is obviously Cambridge is an area of Boston, and Boston is
Right.
obviously where the big hub is, whereas Newcastle, realistically, you could call it the capital of the northeast of England. If you leave, once you leave Newcastle, north of us, there's nothing until you get to Edinburgh, which is an hour and a half away. If you head west, there's no other major city until you get to the sea, and if you head south, you would have to travel about 2 hours before you got to somewhere like Leeds. And then we're actually only 20 minutes from the coast heading east anyway. So you would get to, but the next time you hit land, I think you'd end up in Denmark. So yeah, it's quite different to that. But yeah, similar idea. Harvard very much sits at the heart of Cambridge. Newcastle University very much sits at the heart of the city of Newcastle as well. So.
What programs have been a draw for U.S. and international students?
Yes, so as I mentioned, I mean, we were established as a medical school, and it still is one of our most popular programs, or at least one of the ones we're most well known for. Although actually, it's one of the only programs we have where there's actually a cap on the number of international students, so it can be pretty hard to get on the program. Um, but we've also got very good reputation for things like architecture, for media. Our engineering school was also established in the 1800s, so um, uh, and the city of Newcastle was an industrial powerhouse during the Industrial Revolution as well. So a lot of prestige and history in that area. Marine science due to our location by the coast as well. So we've got marine biology, we've got marine technology, we've got marine zoology, and then also our business school is one of our largest schools as well. So in fact, is our largest school. So we have roughly 3,000 students in our business school, and we cover a wide range of programs. So management, marketing, and then also accountancy, finance, economics as well. So that one is always a popular subject. Business in general is a popular subject for us. And then we've got some smaller programs that particularly are attractive to American students. So our history and archaeology department, Newcastle sits on what was the most northern place the Romans ever successfully invaded. They did try to invade Scotland, but they weren't successful. So this is as far as they got. So they built a wall to keep the Scots out, basically, and that wall runs from the east coast to the west coast, and did historically run through Newcastle, although most of what was in the city is gone now. But if you had 40 minutes to the west of the city, they're still doing live archaeological digs even now, and they're still discovering things about what
Wow.
life was like on the wall way back in the time of Emperor Hadrian. So that's pretty cool for students who are interested in archaeology to be able to go and take part in those live digs. And then more recently, we've got a name for ourselves as a sort of startup tech hub. Newcastle has a pretty low cost of living. One of the reasons why it appeals to a lot of students, and because your student budget does go quite far here, and that also appeals to startup companies because low overheads, and so they can get together a company and kick it off quite easily. So we've got quite a few tech companies that have set themselves up in the region, working in a variety of different industries, fintech being one, and the gaming industry being another. And then it's funny though, because on the same path, on the same scale, we've actually got one of the only fintech company in the UK that's listed in the FTSE 100, which is our largest stock exchange in the UK, and includes like oil giants and banks and things like that. So we've actually got both ends of the scale. We've got sort of those very small companies that maybe have 5 or so employees, right through to multinational companies that are all operating all around the world. So yeah, it's a some of those things link back to some of the programs that stand out specifically for us, and we do find that US students maybe go into some subjects that maybe aren't as popular with other international students. Again, things like English, English literature, English language. But that's obviously because Americans are native English speakers, whereas students from other countries wouldn't feel as comfortable studying those languages when they're a second language to them.
For students who are in subjects like business or engineering or architecture, if they're international students, can they intern in the UK?
Yes, so a lot of our programs have either short-term sort of internships built into them, or just sort of experiences where they can go and visit businesses and hear about how that business operates. And then for longer experiences, a lot of our programs offer what we would call a sandwich year or a work placement, which I think normally in the US gets called a co-op. So it's a whole year rather than like a couple of months. And so what would happen in that instance is you would study normally for 2 years, then you would do a year of work, and then you would come back and study for one more year. So actually you would be in the UK for 4 years, although you'd only be studying for 3 of those 4 years. And a lot of programs have that built into them. The other option is once your studies have finished, there's a visa called a graduate route visa that you do need to apply for, but the only kind of requirement is that you do successfully graduate from your degree. You don't have to do anything else in order to be able to apply. And then that visa allows you to stay in the UK for 2 more years, and during those 2 years you can work full time, and you don't need to have like a sponsorship from an employer or anything like that. So that does give students the opportunity to get more international experience on top of the degree that they've done as well.
For the students who would opt for a work year after 2 years,
Mhm.
does the university help with that process?
Yes, so it is a competitive process, and the companies themselves are the ones ultimately that hold the power as to whether or not you get a job with them. But we organize job fairs. We help students prepare CVs. We help them prepare for interviews. We often will have contacts at those businesses. Those businesses will often have current Newcastle students already at them. So they'll say, okay, we've got three students working for us this year. We're happy to take on another three next year, or actually we want to take on five next year. And so we often have like ways in through that. But ultimately it is on the student themselves to apply and interview and get those positions themselves. Generally speaking, if a student engages with us and goes along to those sessions and gets their CVs checked, they have a very good chance of getting one of those positions. It tends to be students who maybe come very last minute, who don't kind of have that, don't make the most of the support that they get, are the ones that unfortunately are not necessarily successful in getting one of those places. If that was to happen, they could just skip that 1 year work placement, go into their final year of their degree and graduate as normal, and having only studied for 3 years. So it's not the end of the world if it happens. It's not like you're then stuck for a year and sat around doing nothing. But obviously, it isn't a guarantee that you would get one of those places.
Do a lot of students who graduate want to stay in Newcastle after they graduate to work and to live?
We do actually have one of the highest what's called graduate retention rates in the UK. That's the number of graduates that stay locally within the region. I'm not sure when the latest figures were tracked, but traditionally we have retained a lot of our graduates. I am one of those people. I'm not from this area, but I did come here and I did do my degree here, and I haven't, other than a brief period living in China and a brief period living in London, I haven't left. I'm proof of that. Um, but yeah, it is quite common. Certainly, at least when students first graduate, anyway. I think it's harder to track further down the line, and a lot of students are drawn to London because of the size and the job opportunities that London does offer. But there are plenty of my class that I know stayed in the local area. International students, it's very harder, a lot harder to track, but we do know that we have a good number of alumni in the region.
How far is Newcastle from London?
So by direct train, it's anywhere between 2 hours 45 minutes and 3 hours 15 minutes, depending on how often the train stops. Driving time, it's about 5.5 hours, or if you fly, it's an hour. Train is the easiest because it goes city centre to city centre, and obviously you don't need to go through security and all that kind of stuff that you do if you fly. So I think roughly speaking, I think it's similar to like LA to San Francisco, I want to say, in terms of distance.
Yeah,
It's just
that's
over
about right.
500,
That's
about
about
just
right.
over 500 miles, I think. So um, yeah, maybe a bit closer, maybe a bit further than Boston to New York, possibly. So not too far. Like you can do a day trip to London if you don't mind like getting up early, but certainly weekends in London are very accessible. Overnight stays really accessible. The other direction north, Edinburgh is just over an hour and a half away, so that's certainly somewhere you could go for a day trip. And then Newcastle Airport is only 20 minutes from campus, and from there you can fly to roughly 80 different destinations, mostly within Europe. There is a direct flight to Dubai though, if you want to head to the Middle East. And in terms of US students getting here, we don't currently have any direct flights to the US other than occasionally we have sort of holiday flights to Florida for Disney World, Disneyland, whichever one it is. But otherwise, most students would fly via London, via Paris or Amsterdam or Dublin, and then connect from one of those places on to wherever it is that they live in the US.
Now, what are the costs versus an American university? I imagine
Mhm.
parents ask this of you
Yeah,
quite
so
often.
um generally speaking in the UK, and this applies to Newcastle, you're going to be paying the sticker price on the website. So in terms of budgeting, it's quite easy to budget because it's not like the website says one thing and then you have to wait to hear back about how much financial aid you're going to get, etc. So generally speaking, you are going to be paying what's on the sticker price on the website. And again, it's a times by three, not times by four, which obviously also helps as well. You're looking in the region sort of all in terms of tuition, housing, food, entertainment, like one return flight a year. We recommend students budget somewhere in the region of 40 to 45,000 US dollars,
Wow.
to have a comfortable amount of money to live off. Um, Obviously some students will spend less and others will spend more, but that's an amount that would put students in a comfortable position. So if you compare that to what you're going to be paying in the US, it puts us probably in line with out of state costs, and obviously a bit cheaper than private, and then obviously a little bit more expensive than in-state cost. But again, it's by times by three. And when we say that, we really mean it as well. We have a 96% on time completion rate, so it really does mean
Mm.
3 years when we say 3 years. I know the average US student, I think, takes 5.1 years these days, and a lot of institutions in the US quote their 6-year graduation rates. So for us, it's 3 years is 3 years.
Now, last question. In the United States, again, I keep going to the University of Michigan when I think of
Hmm.
your campus. University of Michigan, the bonding around a very successful football team,
Hmm.
bonds the alumni community as well as the students.
Yeah.
What is how does Newcastle bond its alumni community? It's an older institution, and I imagine there's a lot of
Yeah.
alumni.
Um, Not so much around sports, a little bit. We do have a pretty successful rugby team, a good rowing team, basketball more recently, but not so much in the way that the US students really stick to their alma maters in terms of the sports teams. Um, I think there's a little bit of rivalry between us and the other university that's here in Newcastle, which is friendly rivalry, but rivalry nonetheless. Um, and then just generally, I think a general just sort of um, sense of the community on campus and also in the wider city as well. Newcastle, I think, as I said before, has a very good reputation as being a very student-friendly place and a very friendly city as well, just most generally speaking. So a lot of students who come from outside the region love their time here because it feels like a home away from a home, but at the same time, there's a lot to do as well. So where a lot of students do um, gravitate around their memories, just their more general memories of the city, of the campus, of going out to the coast on a nice summer's day and having fish and chips or a barbecue on the beach, wandering down by the river. And there's a Sunday market every Sunday that's gone on for years and years and years now. And so students remember that kind of thing. Um, so I think there's not one thing that I think ties students together, but speaking from my experience of meeting alumni all around the world and not just in the US, because I have recruited in other countries as well before, students generally speak very, very fondly of their time at Newcastle. And one of the things I quite like, particularly about American students, is that although the numbers of US students coming to study in the UK is growing, quite a lot. It's up in the region of 65% if you look at the statistics between 2016 and sort of 2022. Um, there's still a it's still a smallish community, and so you might find that students they might they gravitate around having just studied in the UK more generally rather than specifically at Newcastle, which is quite nice as well. So it might be that you have shared experiences of being Americans in the UK, but you may have gone to two different universities, which is quite nice as well. But we are trying to make more of our alumni community in the US, and we've got off the last top of my head, I think we have more than 6,000 alum in the US. So an okay sized community, and they do gravitate around sort of a few major locations. So we are trying to do more now, sort of in person as opposed to just virtually. So we've got a committee who are based in New York who are arranging like a series of events, and we're hoping to spread that to California, to Texas, as well, because we've got some big groups of alumni in those locations. But obviously, the more students we get coming, the bigger our community will be, and the more we can offer those kind of events as well. I went to an event, for example, that was in LA that was run between ourselves, Leeds, Edinburgh, and Manchester, for example, because individually none of us have a huge number of alumni, but together we have a much bigger group of students that we can bring together.
That's really interesting 'cause I'm an alumnus of two schools in the Big Ten,
Uh-huh.
uh, both rivals to
I was
Michigan.
going to say, which one do you support? Which one
I
do you follow?
well, I went to Illinois for my first master's. Illinois is one of the original schools in the Big Ten.
Mhm.
I went to Rutgers for my bachelor's degree, and for my MBA, Rutgers is one of the newer schools in the conference.
Ah.
Now they're adding four schools that are on the West Coast that will begin their time in the conference next season, the next
Mhm.
sports seasons. But when I run into someone at an airport or a big gathering, and I say, and they went to Michigan or Michigan State, I say, oh, I went to Rutgers in Illinois. We usually the conversation drifts to sports.
Yeah. And
Uh,
I think that's a very unique thing, I think, for American colleges and universities. You don't find that really with any other country in the world where that affinity to the sports team goes well beyond your time as a student. Um, and that isn't something you're going to find anywhere else. Like, regardless of where else you might study, if that is a crucial part of your experience of going to university, then stay in America because you're not going to get that anywhere else. We are trying to not necessarily replicate that, but we are trying to make sport more of a part of our students' time on campus. So we are trying to have a bit more of a strong identity when it comes to sports. We've got like a coherent logo across our teams now, and students do go and watch some of the matches and things like that. But it's a very unique American thing. Like college football stadiums in the US are bigger than most professional soccer stadiums in the UK. Like 80,000 seat stadium at a college in the US is probably bigger than all but one stadium here in the UK. So
okay.
we have a professional football team here in Newcastle, and people love the football team, and that's often something that I think alumni do gather around is the Newcastle United, the soccer team, but their stadium's like I think 45,000. So that's like a mid-sized college stadium in the US. It's nothing particularly impressive, but
Yeah.
that's obviously not unique to the university, although it is actually the football stadium, the soccer stadium is directly opposite our business school. So it is something that students do like to take part in, particularly if they come here and they haven't previously supported a soccer team. It's nice for them to sort of cheer for Newcastle because it does feel like they're becoming a part of the community, the wider community in that sense. We're quite lucky. Newcastle United Stadium is one of the only remaining Premier League football stadiums that's in a city. Most of them have been moved out to sort of the more suburbs, whereas ours is very much the heart of the city. So again, on match days, everybody is going to the football will first of all go get their lunch, go to a pub, have a drink, and it almost feels like a college football game in that sense. I think I've been lucky enough to go to a US college football game and experience how everybody really gathers, like gets behind the
Oh,
team.
yeah.
And I think you get that here in the UK, but well in Newcastle uniquely, I think. But it's the professional team rather than the university team.
The last question, at U.S. universities, there's been more and more concerns about free speech and political positions and activities. Some students voluntarily silence themselves because they're
Mhm.
afraid they'll be alienated. Others are have very strong identities, some to the point they're activists on the part of their positions. How is the dynamic at Newcastle?
So the UK in general, if you're talking about politics, has less extremes, less extreme
Yes.
left and less extreme right. Most people are more towards the center when it comes to political views. So I think it's easier probably for people to express those views because there's more agreement around certain topics and certain things. I mean, people will definitely differ on certain things, but maybe their differences aren't as far apart as maybe they are in the US. Um, but there are definitely political organizations on both sides of the scale that students can get involved in. There's also charities and organizations that they can work for and volunteer for, and we have guest speakers who have a variety of different opinions. Um, but I would say it's possibly less heated than maybe on some campuses and more widely in the in society as it in the UK as it is in the US, I think. But I think we just ask that people are respectful of each other's opinions, but we're not going to say somebody can't have an opinion. But yeah, you just need to be respectful as well. But I tend to find that students and the wider British society doesn't have as much extremes in terms of left and right as maybe the US does. So it's possibly less of an issue because I think people probably have more consensus around certain topics. We don't have any, as an institution, we don't have any political affiliation, we don't have any religious affiliation. So we're not, you're free to practice any religion, no religion. There are groups and societies for students of religion and not of religion as well. So, and there's spaces on campus where you can pray, where you can go to the mosque. We have a Jewish society. We have a university chaplain who is someone who can lead people in a spiritual way, but not a faith-based way. So again, I think going back to what I said earlier, we really have a very wide mix of students, and you tend to find that people come because they want that mixture. They don't like I had friends from a wide variety of political, socioeconomic, religious, ethnic backgrounds when I was here, and I really enjoyed that because it meant it opened my eyes to the world and really helped me experience things that prior to moving here at the age of 18 I'd never had the chance to experience.
That's a perfect ending to this conversation. Thank you for the time. I learned a lot from this, and I
You're
hope
welcome.
everyone out there, if people want to contact you, what's the best way for them to do that?
So my email is probably the easiest way, and then if they want to have a more in-depth chat, I can send them a link and they can arrange to have a one-to-one chat with me. We do also have a member of staff who's actually based in the US, so she is based in just outside St. Louis in Missouri. So if it time zone wise it doesn't work with my calendar because I'm anywhere between 5 and 8 hours ahead of the US, then they could potentially talk to her as well about studying at Newcastle. Sarah, who is based in the US, has visited a couple of times now, so she has got experience of being an American and being here and knowing the UK from an American's point of view. But as I said, like I also studied here as well, which so I've got that experience to talk about.
Okay,
But I can give my email address and Sarah's email address if people want to follow up afterwards.
okay, all right. So do you want to give them to me, or do you want to give them to
Yeah, I
on the
can give them to
post?
you, and if you want to pop them
I-
on the website, that would be great.
I'll do that.
Yeah,
Thomas, thank you again for
you're
spending
welcome,
this time with
Stuart.
me
It's
today.
been nice talking to you.